Hello friends, my name is Marines, and chances are that if you've watched some of my videos across this last year, you've heard me mention the podcast that I co-host. This is for primarily two reasons. One, I really love this podcast and I'm super proud of it and I love sharing it with you guys. And two, the podcast has now become one of the ways that I pick up media. I end up reading and watching things for Snark Squad Pod, and then I come over here to talk about them, to review them, and to wrap them up. It has always been our intention to upload our episodes also on YouTube. It makes sense for us, I think, from a perspective of getting the podcast out to as many people as possible, but also because Nicole and I both spend so much time on YouTube. There's a lot of crossover between the things I do here on this channel and the things I do for Snark Squad and the things that I do for Snark Squad Pod. We are starting to upload that backlog over on Snark Squad's channel. The first episode of the podcast ever is currently on the channel. If you are somebody who doesn't listen to a lot of podcasts, or if you haven't had the chance to check mine out yet, it is now on YouTube, which hopefully helps because you guys are also on YouTube. As soon as we finished recording this particular episode of the podcast, I knew that I wanted to put it up on my channel. We've done book reviews in the past for sure, but I loved having this conversation. I had so many feelings about this book, and I think that it truly is something that you guys would enjoy. You've probably already noticed from the title, but I'm talking about the book Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Nicole and I are joined in this episode by our friends Devin Hinchy and Kat O'Keefe. I hope you guys enjoy it, and please do come and talk to me in the comments about all of your Daisy Jones and the Six feelings. This week on Snark Squad Pod, we're joined by Devin Hinchy and Kat O'Keefe to talk about Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Welcome back to Snark Squad Pod. My name is Marines.
I'm Nicole Sweeney, and we are joined this week by Kat and Devin.
Hi, I'm Kat. I have a YouTube channel, Katie-tastic, where I occasionally make videos about books and writing. But mostly I spend too much time on Twitter ranting and raving about various media I'm consuming and retweeting lots of memes.
And I'm Devin, and I have absolutely nothing to plug, but I am so excited to talk about this book with you guys. 'Cause, wow.
So Kat and Devin are joining us to discuss Daisy Jones and the Six, which is a novel about, as the title suggests, a character named Daisy Jones and a band called The Six. The novel is written as a series of interview transcripts with Daisy Jones and members of The Six, reflecting on their history. So starting with Daisy Jones as a young child, she's the beautiful daughter of artists in LA and something of a prodigy. She eventually becomes a singer-songwriter and gets signed to the same label that The Six also gets signed to, and we sort of follow their journey as a band, how they came together and how they eventually got signed, and what led their journeys to sort of overlap. It's all very like VH1 behind the music, reflecting on their career trajectory and the very, very successful album that they made together, and the hot disaster by which the band, or their collaboration rather, imploded. I guess also The Six sort of imploded along with their collaboration with Daisy. We learn in a bit of a twist at the end of the novel that the interviews are actually being conducted by lead singer of The Six, Billy, his daughter, Julia, shortly after the death of her mother, or I guess, I don't know, a few years after, I don't know. And maybe that's part of why she's doing this, is that her mom, I don't know, wanted Billy to reconnect with Daisy. That I'm not entirely clear about. But mostly this is the story of these very volatile, famous people and their what brought them together and then what ultimately tore them apart.
So we'll start where we always start, with the question, did you like this? So, Kat, did you like this?
For the most part, I did like it. There were sections where I was kind of bored, or I don't know, bored sounds a little bit harsh. I wasn't super emotionally invested for a good beginning chunk, and I was a little underwhelmed for what such high expectations I had going into this, but I did overall enjoy it. I think Taylor Jenkins Reid is fantastic at characters and relationships, and at the very least, it was very entertaining.
You know, I have very mixed and complicated feelings with this book. as I like finished it, I said, "Oh my God, I loved that," and then I was like, "Wait, did I?" Because I was completely unsure. But yeah, it was right about probably page 200. I think it took about 200 pages, and then I fell absolutely madly in love with it. But up until then, I probably could have put it down and not been sad.
My feelings are similar to Kat's in that for the most part, I enjoyed this. I found it super entertaining. And like it's a book that I think I will reread. I also listened to this on audiobook. The audiobook is full cast and is like the cast is fantastic. And it's definitely something that I can see myself listening to, I don't know, like while I'm cleaning or like doing stuff around the house, just as sort of like a fun, low effort experience. I also had, I think, very, very high expectations going into it that this didn't quite meet. There were certain things about the interview conceit that sort of missed the mark for me. Like I liked the idea, but I think that some of Taylor Jenkins Reid's ability to develop relationships almost got lost in that format. But on the whole, I liked this book.
I liked it too. I thought it was pretty entertaining. I binged it pretty much a minute before we started recording this. So all of my feelings are real fresh for you guys. But I found it like incredibly readable. And we actually picked this for our book club book for this month, for the month of April, actually. And it was kind of a quiet one because I think it's difficult to talk about in chunks just because it is so like readable, and it just, I don't know, the story flows in a way that if you're like picking at the middle of it, there isn't much to talk about yet. It all hinges on kind of like a complete story and then the last minute like twists and turns, which we'll get to those too. So I don't know, there was something about it that just begs to be consumed like quickly and enjoyed at almost a superficial level, but that didn't really hit home for me, or there weren't a lot of intense emotions. It was good. It was entertaining. I would listen to it again. I would read it again, but I don't feel like I have anything to #deep to say about it. So this should be a really interesting conversation. I think the most natural place to start is about the structure of the book and about the way that it went about telling us the story in these little snippets and in the interview format. And I think in a way that it's really interesting when you get books that don't acknowledge necessarily that they're novels or books. And so you're almost reading something in a format for which it wasn't really intended almost. So how did that structure work for you guys? What did you guys think about the way we were presented this story?
I think my expectations for it were really, really high. Because it was in that interview format, I was like, oh, this is something I have never read before. This is entirely original and totally new to me, and no pressure, read, but do it right. I think I did enjoy it after a while. And I was one of I don't do a lot of audiobooks, and Nicole knows this, and she has reprimanded me for it. And it is something I will rectify. And I think I'm going to rectify it with this book, because I think this book in particular in a full cast would be absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I actually listened to the audiobook myself, and I feel if I had been reading a physical copy, I might have DNF'd it, or at least I wouldn't have felt any urgency to get through it, because that beginning part, I struggled with a little bit, and the audiobook saved it for me because the voice acting was fantastic and they really brought the characters to life. But I feel like the format might not have worked for me if I was physically reading it.
Yeah, it was difficult. There was parts where I was, reading the name and then reading the transcript of whatever they had said, going, wait, who's this person again? And I'd have to go back to when they were first introduced and kind of start all over again. And after a while, I got kind of into it. And, like I'd mentioned, about 2/3 of the way through the book, I totally fell in love with it, and I thought it was really fascinating. But it was the first bit was really hard to get into.
Yeah.
I can totally see that. Yeah, like that is, hearing you describe that reading experience makes total sense to me. Again, only having read the audiobook. And I briefly had the thought that like maybe I would like to go back and reread it like physically before starting this podcast, but LOL, time. So that did not happen. But I think the format lent itself very well to the audiobook, like to having this full cast performance. In particular, Judy Greer as Karen was like, oh, I adore you. I want to hang out with you. You're the best. I love you to bits and pieces. But like the whole cast was fantastic. And so that, I think, like propelled me through what was a fairly slow start. And I think there are a lot of things about this format that are super interesting. And so I don't want to say that like it completely missed the mark. Like for me, I think there are places where some of the relationship dynamics played out in ways that made me wish that we were maybe bouncing back and forth between narrative and interview. I'm not really sure. But I also think that the general feeling of, you know, like basically listening to a VH1 Behind the Music episode also lent itself to something particularly interesting about this book. So I don't know. I had mixed feelings about the format.
I hit the sweet spot because I will tell you what I did. I started with the audiobook because it was full cast, and full cast audiobooks are like my jam. So I was like, cool, I'll listen to this. And somewhere like in the first chapter or two, I could not keep straight, even with the voices changing, like I couldn't keep straight what character I was listening to, because the audiobook does this really strange thing where sometimes it will announce the name of the speaker and sometimes it doesn't. It just goes straight into like their narrative. And I couldn't discern some of the differences between some of the male voices specifically. So I was losing it a lot.
Especially since I'm pretty sure that both Benjamin Bratt and Pablo Schur, like they were both doing multiple voices, right? So like,
I couldn't even tell that. I was just like, there's a couple of white guys in this band who all sound the same.
Yes. So that I was like kind of struggling mostly with that in the beginning of the audiobook. So I went back and restarted it, and I grabbed my physical copy of the book because I got it as book of the month, and I read along with the audiobook, and I did not have any struggle getting into the story because I was both reading with my eyes and listening with my ears. And it worked perfectly. Like I was into the story immediately, being able to just know who was talking to me and what role they played in the band.
So that's the correct way with our combined knowledge.
Yeah. Taylor Jenkins Reid has the best business model. You have to buy 2 versions of her story too. Enjoy it correctly. But outside of that, I did like the interview style just because it lent itself really well to the rock and roll story that we were telling. Like those two things matched for me. You interview a bunch of the band and it is what it is. The other thing that I thought the structure did really well was lend itself to what I think is one of the bigger themes here. And it is like memory and the way that you get different sides to a story. And every time somebody would say something and the next person would say a slightly different version than that, or somebody like remembered it entirely differently, like that was the stuff that I was like really enjoying and laughing at, because that's life, right? You remember stuff very differently. Everybody has their own sides of the story. I thought that without a lot of ceremony or like pomp and circumstance, it explored that just by giving us this story in people's own words. Like there wasn't a lot of like thinking about the ways that people do this. It just presented it and let the reader notice it, which I thought was really cool. But it was, one of the better like cons that you can have about a story is like wanting more of it. And because we didn't have a lot of interaction between the characters, we didn't have dialogue. Like I just wanted more. I wish I would have seen more of the relationships in action, which is the con of the structure. So it was mixed feelings for me as well.
I also loved the bits about memory though, like hands down, like the best parts of the book. And I think this is definitely also a place where the audiobook particularly enhanced the experience, like literally hearing the voices of, someone saying it was like this, and then someone saying, no, it was the complete opposite of that. Or like Camila's wedding dress. That was both Billy and Karen were like deeply sure of her wedding, of like what she was wearing when they got married, and like they had completely different descriptions, and just little moments like that I mean, I finished this book a couple weeks ago, and like that is something that still sticks with me as like a thing that I remember, because like you said, it highlighted that experience of people remembering things differently in such a like beautiful and organic way.
I think another interesting thing that kind of lends to rereading this book is also once you know who the author is and who they are giving their interviews to, how that colors what they're saying and their perspective of events.
So that's my least favorite thing about the book.
I was going to get to the twist later, but let's talk about this now.
I don't know. It bothered me because it was a twist that didn't need to be a twist. Like it was just, it felt like a twist for the sake of it. And I don't know. There's no way I think to talk about this book without also, bringing up a little bit of the like elephant of the room, which is the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Like that's part of why I had such high expectations going into this book, because I loved that so much. And that also had a similar like, who people are to each other end of the book twist, but that was one that felt like earned, and it made sense to me why this information was being withheld. Like there were clear reasons. It was also telling us even more about Evelyn. Like everything about that twist worked in a way that, and like they set it up from the jump that like there was something there. We just weren't going to know what it was until the end of the book. Whereas in this case, like there was no indication that there was anything there, and it was just this weird. I didn't understand why we were doing this. Like, I did not understand why this information was doled out to us as a, like, end of story twist in that way. That I don't know, didn't sit well with me.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, actually. Just everything from going into this having such high expectations, because Evelyn Hugo was my favorite book of last year. So I really wanted to love this. And I was just really underwhelmed by the twist. I felt like we had so much tension brewing, and it was like, what are we leading to? And then it just felt so weird in the moment where the twist was revealed, because it was Julia who was like chiming in with a transcript, a conversation she had with Daisy, but it added nothing to the story in that moment. Like
we have no
wasn't
reason
like
not to believe Daisy. The stated reason is, I'm going to add this for veracity so that to trust Daisy. But like the audience has no reason not to trust Daisy.
Yeah, and she didn't know anything. She was 5 years old and she was asleep for the most important part of the conversation between Camilla and Daisy.
Right.
So it was just to reveal like, oh, it's her daughter doing that. But I feel like that could have been revealed at the end when Billy was talking to her directly. Just like in that moment where we have the climactic scene where Camilla is asking Daisy to leave, it just felt so weird to have that reveal there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you there, Kat. I loved the reveal, but like it was in the wrong place. Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, waiting for Billy would be good.
So, I have a question. Devin, did you read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo?
Nope. This is my first Taylor Jenkins read. Yeah.
Uh-huh. So,
although hearing all of these things, I would say it's immediately on my list. Immediately.
I'm sorry if this conversation spoils you a little bit, but I think that having like read Evelyn Hugo first and then coming into Daisy Jones and the Six probably messes with your perception of the twist. Not that it would be any better or worse. I agree that the placement was wrong. It wasn't needed, but it had the additional like sting of like, I've read this before from this author in a very similar structured story about very similar themes. Like if you take Daisy Jones, or if you take Evelyn Hugo and you make it rock and roll and straight, you basically have Daisy Jones. And not in a bad way. I enjoyed both stories, but it was just a twist where like I was like, we didn't need this, and we especially didn't need it again. So that was my biggest like qualm with that reveal.
Yeah, that is a really interesting point. Like, it's part of what the twist did was like further make connections in the reader's mind between this book and that book. I mean, for anybody who has already read it, which again is part of why we have like these somewhat differing experiences with the twist. But like for people who read this other book, it did exactly what you were saying and like force us into making that comparison that like, why? We didn't need to be making this comparison.
I will say that I don't know if it was meant to be read as a twist, but the thing that really kept my attention, I was not trying to guess who the interviewer was at all throughout it. Like I didn't care. I didn't know we were supposed to be paying attention. The thing that I was really trying to guess the whole time was who was going to leave the band first. And I think that to kind of bring it back to the structure, I think the interview structure did a good job, like teasing that out, because every once in a while you would hear people saying like, I was starting to get tired of it. Or how do you guess that this person would have left? Like that would. And so the whole time I was like, who's going to leave first? Like, how is this going to break down? Which I thought was probably the more like, I don't know, interesting twist to me.
I'm so with you there. So with you. I found myself wondering if they actually thought those things when they were in the band, you know, because going into that idea of memory and they're saying, oh yeah, I was getting really tired of it and I was getting ready to leave. And I'm like, but were you though? Like, or are you saying that because you knew the band broke up? Like, because you knew it was inevitable, looking back with hindsight, you're like, oh yeah, I was going to be the first to leave.
It was mutual.
And I think the twist of Julia being the narrator was an interesting twist in that it wasn't answering a question, but was rather like presenting a future question of like what's going to happen now between Billy and Daisy.
Absolutely.
That is also part of why I don't think I liked it. I don't know. I couldn't quite put my finger on how or why I was so, I don't know, like ill at ease with the way the story ended until somebody in our Discord compared this to the end of How I Met Your Mother, and I was like, that's it. Like that is what it is. It's like residual hostility from the end of How I Met Your Mother is like part of what's happening here. And I don't know, like it left me a little cold. Like the whole dynamic of just the triangle and like the way the reveal played into that, and like the idea that Julia is just, you know, interviewing them so that maybe they can like get to. I don't know what it was suggesting, but I didn't like it. It did not feel satisfying.
Yeah, I actually have a question about what Julia's timeline was in putting this book together, because when she's when she's interviewing Billy, he's talking about like, you know, your mother's been gone for 5 years now, but she also interviewed Camilla. She's been working on this book for half a decade at the bare minimum. I just have a lot of questions about what she was doing for that entire 5-year period and how she pieced this together. What was the order that she interviewed people? Did this start with her interviewing Camilla, or like, I just want to know why she's doing this book.
Behind the music of Behind the Music. I want to put a pin in this idea of like the end of the book and the future of Daisy and Billy so that we can actually talk about Daisy, Billy, and Camilla as kind of characters. I think let's start with Daisy. You know, she's kind of a little bit the main character. She shares her screen time a lot, but she definitely is like the force here in the story. So what did you guys think about Daisy as a character?
I loved Daisy. I think like she is flawed and messy, but she felt very whole. And I don't know. I thoroughly enjoyed her, and I understood a lot of why she was doing the things that she was doing, even when she's doing, you know, the wrong things. I don't know. I found her thoroughly engaging and fascinating.
I feel similar, right? I think the whole time I was reading anything in Daisy's voice, all I could think of was like high school me going, "This is the coolest woman that has ever existed."
Which like she's like a rock star. This makes sense. Yeah.
And I think, you know, high school me was very into 70s rock. So like the idea that there was this badass woman who did what she wanted when she wanted to would have been absolutely fascinating and horrifically inspirational for me because drugs. But I do, like, I think for a while I found her to be an unlikable main character because I did not necessarily enjoy the things that she was doing. You know, doing coke is not great. Yeah, she's a messy bitch. And so at first I mistook that for thinking that I didn't like her. But after I finished it, I realized that I did really enjoy her because she was very human and, like you said, Nicole, very whole, and felt like a person I would meet in my life and be like, yeah, you're dope. You know?
I think Taylor Jenkins Reid is just fantastic at writing characters that feel like real people that you want to like Google, like, is Daisy Jones a real person? Like, because like I really enjoyed her as a character. At times I found her kind of entitled and bratty, but because we were hearing her perspective on how she was, like, we got a sense of growth and that she wasn't that person anymore, which made it much easier to like her.
I agree. I think that I struggled with her primarily in the beginning because of that, like, entitlement, and not only entitlement, but because it was entitlement that came from privilege. Like, I remember reading about her, like, stomping her feet, like, I'm not going to record this album. And then she just went to the house that she could afford anyways. And I was like, that's nice. Right. You know, I don't want to work. Like, good for you, Daisy Jones. Like, so that was a little off-putting to me, but it's something that I think that the story doesn't necessarily look away from. So it talks very much about how her upbringing, who she was, and everything fed into, like, Daisy Jones, the rock star, and how her talent along with that upbringing really was like the perfect formula for producing this particular character, this particular person. So that I thought that was really neat and interesting. I don't think I'll count her like among some of my favorite characters just because we read about her in a period of time where she was like broken. I feel like we didn't really get to see Daisy Jones, the real person. We saw Daisy Jones, the drug addict, or Daisy Jones, the young, almost abandoned child who somebody should have really been watching her. So it was like almost like watching a car wreck more than like my favorite character ever. But it was super engaging. And yes, it felt like a real person.
Well, and that was what was really interesting hearing her talk about this past portion of her life, is you had those moments where you see her say, yeah, I wasn't great, or I wasn't doing good, or I wasn't doing the right thing. And that was really nice to have it coming from hindsight and to see that obviously as time has gone on, she has grown and learned that the things she was doing were not the best. So that was a really refreshing take on it, because I think if it had just been a novel in a standard timeline where we just got Daisy in her drug addict rock star phase, I probably wouldn't have liked her. I think it would have been a really unlikable character to me. But because we saw her reflecting on her growth, it made her more positive in my eyes.
Yeah.
The part of Daisy that I felt was essentially Daisy regardless, and like the flip side of the entitlement was I'm not anybody's bitch Daisy, which I loved. Like every moment. Every time she was like, no, I'm not doing it your way. When she stood up to the band, when she said, I'm not anybody's muse, like all of those times where it just felt very like essential to who she was. And to see her like asserting herself and being like, yeah, even when she had weak moments of like, you know, everybody has self-doubt or whatnot, but there was something about her that just like knew who she was and like asserted herself that I thought was like inspirational in the only good way, if you want to take away anything from Daisy Jones.
It's that don't give a fuck attitude where she just didn't care if Billy liked her, if any of the members in the band liked her, or if they approved of what she was doing. She just didn't care.
I mean, this also, like you could say, is born out of her privilege as well, though, right? You know, she had the luxury of not needing to care at a very young age. And I mean, like it's like a lot of factors, but also this speaks to the sort of larger thing of how whole and complete she feels as a character, that I'm like, oh, okay, let's like armchair analyze her. I have very strong opinions about what things in her childhood led to her being this way, like because she was so whole and complete. But yes, I agree that 100% is her best quality.
All right, so we'll move on to the lead singer of the Six, and I guess the other main character and the primary love interest kind of in the story, and that's Billy. How did you guys feel about Billy?
I'm still trying to figure it out.
Okay.
I finished this yesterday, and my first reaction to him and my reaction whenever his character was speaking on the pages, I was just like, ugh. And I don't know why, because I don't think he deserved that treatment, but I was a little wary of him because I don't know, because he's a entitled white dude, I think, probably. I think it came from a place of just like we had Karen, we had Daisy, and then I had to listen to Billy, and I just didn't want to.
Yeah, he is Ted Mosby. I can't have this conversation now without making these comparisons in my brain.
It's so good. That's a very good comparison, though. Kudos to your Discord channel.
It's who he is. I mean, he is better than Ted Mosby. I will grant him that. I don't know. I didn't have particularly strong feelings about him one way or another. He is somebody who like sours in my opinion for the twist, though. I just I have so many uncomfortable feelings about his character in light of where this story wound up. And I don't know. And so I am similarly in an I don't know place. I definitely did not hate his character while I was reading. I definitely did not have that ugh reaction when he was speaking, but I also never felt particularly attached to him. In fact, I kept waiting for him to leave because I was like, okay, then Daisy Jones will just be the lead singer, and like, that's fine. You can go.
Yeah, I didn't dislike him, but I didn't really like him either. Because he also had a kind of entitled sense about him. You know, it was his band. He was very controlling over it. And I also feel like he might have been one of the most unreliable narrators, if not the most unreliable, just from, the perspective of the so-called twist.
Right.
He's framing the story. He's telling the story to his daughter. So he is changing details according to that.
Right.
I felt for Billy in certain points of his story, like the whole addiction part of it, which strong trigger warning for this whole story when it comes to like drug and addiction and all of that. So that part of it, and hearing him get sober and the way that he talks about being sober but looking back on his addiction, I thought was really compelling. And so I felt for him in that regard. But I found it interesting that the story says a couple times like about how the women in this band and in this time period, because it is also happening like primarily in the 70s, like how they're trying to assert themselves, and sometimes like men want a cookie or something like that, or a sticker, I think it says, for like treating women like people. And I feel like that the story wants us to give kudos to Billy for not cheating on his wife. Like his whole thing is like, no, I'm not gonna cheat on her. I'm not gonna cheat on her. And you're supposed to be like, oh, Billy, how nice of you to not cheat on your wife and break up your family. Like that was the part where I was like, what is happening here? I mean, I thought that some of the relationship between Billy and Camila was compelling in the way that they talked about trust and keeping secrets from the one that you love. But yeah, I think that the primary way that we were supposed to think that Billy was like doing better than Daisy was that, he wasn't going to cheat on his wife this way, which frickin' do, good for you.
Yeah. Right.
I don't know what else to say other than like, yeah, the unreliable narrator thing is really interesting to me. I hadn't thought about it that way in light of the twist, but that's super interesting, especially because he was always trying to paint himself as the good guy. And like, I just asked, like a simple question. I just asked if he was okay. I was trying to do the right thing, and everybody else is like, fuck Billy. So right.
Everybody is all of these moments where he is doing this, like, I was just, asking a question. I was just being the good guy. And everybody else remembers this as a moment of feeling betrayed by him. Like there are so many examples of this happening over and over again. Yes.
Yeah, I think that hits the nail on the head why I felt he was icky. So thanks, Mari. That helps. I understand my feelings now. Yeah. But it was that idea of like, yeah, it was that yes, he was talented, and I'm sure he was magnetic to watch on stage, in this world. But yeah, it was that idea of like, let's give him a sticker for being him. And it's like, okay, that's great. But yeah, it was like, you're doing the bare minimum, man. Like, you're doing a great job at the bare minimum, but you're doing the bare minimum. But I agree. His moments where he talks about, and again, trigger warning for drug abuse and alcohol abuse, I found it compelling when he talked about the moments where he almost broke. Because I think that gave Daisy's moments of feeling whole to Billy. And I felt like that made him a rounded character for me. And that empathy was growing a bit for him there.
Right. Yeah, I think Billy also really downplayed his feelings for Daisy a lot. And I think that's something that stopped me from getting as emotionally invested as I wanted to, because it wasn't until we were like halfway through the book, 2/3 of the way through the book, when I was like, oh, they are in love with each other, because Billy downplayed it so much and like didn't want to talk about it. And I really loved the complexities of that love triangle, how, Billy did love both of them. And like at some points he was more in love with Daisy, but he loved Camilla and like honored their relationship more. And that's why he always stuck with that. So I did really enjoy the complexities and the nuance of that love story. But I do feel like Billy being an unreliable narrator really dampened the emotional impact of it.
That leaves us with the final leg of this triangle, and that's Camilla, who Billy meets before he meets Daisy, and they date for a while, and they break up. But when the band starts getting pretty big, he realizes that was a mistake, and so they end up getting married, having children together, having a long life in marriage together until Camilla passes away at the end of the book. So how did you guys feel about Camilla?
She was a lot of fun, but she also didn't feel particularly whole to me. Like in spite of being ultimately a fairly major player, she was a character who we didn't get that much of for reasons that are plain. The story isn't ostensibly about her. She's not a member of the band, and she died at some point in Julia's compiling of this book timeline. Still very unclear. So like there are reasons for that. She is definitely a character that I feel, I don't know. I felt like she was a very idealized character, but now that I am saying this, like that makes perfect sense because Julia is the one telling the story. So of course, Julia's version of her dead mother is the best possible like vision of her, right? So of course Camilla seems like the best person in this book, and also everybody being interviewed after she's deceased. Like what are you going to say about her? Like to her daughter, like you are talking to her daughter about her dead mother. It makes perfect sense in the end why Camilla ends up feeling a little bit too idealized to be real. And so I don't know. Now my feelings are shifting because I'm having this thought. I will say that the moment that like truly broke me was at the end, like that conversation that, Camilla and Daisy have, where Camilla basically is like, you gotta go. And when Camilla tells her, don't count yourself out just yet. You have a whole lot of life left ahead of you. Like just ugly sobs, truly like ugly racking sobs. So I think I liked Camilla? Question mark.
I think Camilla, I agree with you, Nicole. I think she was that idealized, perfect woman. I don't want to say stereotype because I don't think it's a stereotype. That's not quite the right word. But she was that idealized woman as a foil to Daisy's mess of like, here's Camilla who keeps it all together, and here's Daisy who's holding on, And so I enjoyed her role in the storytelling for that pure, literary trope. But I do also, I liked that she was this quiet, calm voice of reason in this mess of rock and roll shenanigans. And that was really nice. But I do think you're right. She's very idealized. But I think I like her. I kind of look at her and go, I wouldn't mind taking inspiration from that instead of Daisy,
I mean, she's the one that I would actually want to hang out with on a regular basis. Like, Daisy, like, I don't don't know. Like, it'd be cool to like have met her once, but I don't want that in my life. I don't want that energy on the day to day.
Yeah, she seems
like Camilla.
exhausting.
I would get coffee with.
Yes, Camilla's a good coffee date.
Yeah, I totally agree with you guys, especially about her being very idealized. But I do think I liked her as well. It is tricky because she's not as developed as some of the other characters that we spend more time with and that we really dive into their flaws. But especially during the beginning, while Daisy kind of had this entitled thing going for her where she just felt like she deserved these things, on the flip side, Camilla was willing to like fight for them. Like, she saw something that she wanted and she was like, I want that. I'm going to have that. And she like really went for it. And I really appreciated that.
I really liked Camilla, and I think it is fair to say that she is idealized. I think the story does a good job of also acknowledging her faults in the way that you would feel comfortable acknowledging somebody's faults after they passed away, like very quickly. Like, you know, she could be stubborn and blah, 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 but she was great. But I think the reason that I felt really drawn by Camilla's character is because she was the most adult person here, and she was the one not in the rock and roll lifestyle. Like, so she was the one taking care of the kids at home and being, you know, I don't know, that the idea that she was that foil. But at the same time, she had a lot of things that reminded me of Daisy, and her like take no nonsense attitude was very much like Daisy. She was out there like speaking up for what she wanted and fighting for her own goals. It just didn't happen to be rock and roll, like famous singer kind of thing. It was something was a little more relatable or accessible, I should say. So I really liked Camilla. And I think that the fact that this entire story revolves around people not using their words, and you get to the point where she marches into Daisy's room and is like, no, absolutely not. This is not happening. You need to leave. I was like, yay, like cheering her on at that point. But she did it with compassion. She did it kindly. She was still giving Daisy like, you know, I want you to succeed, but this is not your ground to succeed on, basically. So I loved that moment in the story. And I think it really cemented Camilla as, even though she was a background character, it almost made it so much more impressive that I like found her and I was like, yes, I like you a lot. So yeah, that brings us kind of back around to the love triangle. And more, I think specifically, I'm curious what the reveal, we talked about the reveal, but like the open-endedness of it and what it kind of means for like Camilla to have left a note to basically like sanction now the rekindling of the relationship between Billy and Daisy.
Well, ever since Nicole mentioned How I Met Your Mother, I can't think of anything else. And also, the more we talk about Camilla and Daisy, the more I feel that Billy doesn't deserve either of them.
Yes.
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 Like, yeah, now Billy is, you know, his wife has been dead for 5 years. He's lonely. His daughters are like living around the country, so he doesn't see them as much. But how do we know Daisy wants to rekindle a romance with him? Like,
right.
Daisy had
That's
this
what
whole
I'm
full
saying.
life. She adopted kids. She has like this charity foundation. Like, Billy who?
And that was like my main takeaway too, was this idea also that like Billy, one of my least favorite characters, like it was fine. I didn't love him. He was one of the less good ones in the whole story. He gets to live his whole entire life with the amazing Camilla, and now she's dead and he's like, oh, okay, second choice. Like, really?
Wow.
That's how you're ending the story about like really amazing, powerful women. I don't know. I didn't like it. I didn't like it. No thanks.
Yep, ditto. Nope, don't like. Do not recommend that course of action.
Especially since I feel like my overall feelings about the whole story would be better if we hadn't gone there at the end, you know? Like it was a thing that like it it couldn't happen. Like the timing was just bad for a whole host of reasons, both because Billy was already married and because of like where Daisy was at as a person and where Billy was at as a person at that particular moment when they were like around each other, and you know, whatever, like it didn't work out. I just, the fact that we at the end have to say, but don't worry, Camilla's dead now. Like, oh my God.
Yeah.
What? No. Fuckboy Billy doesn't deserve either one of them.
Okay, so there are a ton of other characters, like there's the whole rest of the 6. So are there any of them that stuck out to you, or anybody that you want to talk about particularly?
Karen! Karen's the best
Karen
one.
is the best nickname, first of all.
Yes. Also, she was just great. I loved her. I loved that Judy Greer, perpetual like female sidekick in every movie, is also voicing this character in the audiobook. That was fantastic. But like, unlike so many of the characters that Judy Greer plays in movies, Karen got like a real ending. You know, like we had a real sense of who she was and like what she wanted. And I loved her. I loved every time Karen was in my ears.
I think I trusted her the most too.
Yes.
When Karen said something, I was like, "Yep, that is fact."
Yep.
You know what?
What Camilla was wearing on her wedding day, it's what Karen said, not what fucking Billy said.
Right. And I enjoyed her love story too with, it was Graham, right? Wasn't that who she is?
Yes.
Yeah, Graham. I enjoyed their dalliance, might be an appropriate word for it. But I enjoyed their storyline, and it was kind of one of those moments with two otherwise side characters that you're like, I would take a book about you two, though, just for the record.
And it also explored a lot of just really interesting things, like the dynamics of their relationship and the very different, stakes for both of them in terms of their relationship, and like revealing their, Karen wanting to keep it a secret and Karen's reasons for aborting the baby, like all of that. I think was really, really interesting, and in kind of a similar way that like the Daisy Billy relationship is a lot of, this didn't work out. Like this is another example of reasons that it just doesn't work out that I thought were really, really interesting and well explored.
Yeah, that moment with Karen with getting the abortion was another moment that made me fall ever so slightly in love with Camilla when she says, like, I want you to be happy, but I want you to find your happy, even if it's not my happy. I was like, okay, there it is. There are the feels.
You're a good.
You're a good.
I also thought it was really interesting how Karen, Camilla, and Daisy, in each of their own ways, they knew what they wanted and they weren't willing to compromise for it. They were very strong in their convictions of what they wanted and going about getting it.
And in 3 very different ways. They wanted 3 very different things. And they were even 3 different people. Like the way that Daisy felt very comfortable, like wearing a shirt where you could see her boobs underneath. And Karen was like, no, ma'am. But you understood both of them. Right. Turtlenecks all the time. But you understood both of them equally. And so they were like not 3 cardboard cutouts of the same character. They felt very different, but they all had that in common, which I thought was amazing to just see a story with 3 women basically going after what they wanted.
Yeah. And because they had that in common, they understood each other too, right? Like there was there was nothing sort of adversarial about the idea of, Daisy showing off her nipples and Karen in turtlenecks. Like they understood each other too.
I immediately was drawn to Karen, like when I was reading, and I was like, am I supposed to love her? And then I kept like waiting for something to happen where like she wouldn't be like a good character or she did something. So I also enjoyed that she just stayed like so Karen throughout, and I don't know, she was so nonchalant too. Like I kept forgetting that everybody was like heavy into drugs because Daisy's addiction was like such a large part of the story, but they would all just casually be like, yeah, we were high or we were doing this or that. So it was like a very like the drug scene was real for this rock and roll band, but everybody got to be a little more nonchalant about it than Daisy. But I don't know why that spun off from Karen. My point was that I really enjoyed Karen's story.
I'm trying to remember important things about the other members, and there is little coming to my mind.
Yeah. Well, it's because there were two in particular. I think these were the two that I couldn't really tell apart because they both had such minor parts. It was, I still don't even know what instruments they played, but it was the drummer and the bass guitarist, and one of them had like a long-term girlfriend. But I kept getting them confused. Pete.
So Pete, I think, is the one of the guitarists, and then the drummer was Warren. I want to say
that
his
sounds
name.
right.
Yeah, one of them sucked.
No,
Eddie sucked.
They blended together.
Oh, Eddie
sucked.
Eddie,
yes.
Okay, no, but you know what I'm talking about, right? There was one that sucked, like a lot.
Yeah,
like
Eddie sucked.
Eddie had nothing but animosity the whole time.
Right? He was just bitter and angry.
The best part, he has this line where he's like, I'm not this dude. I'm not normally bitter. And I'm like, yeah, you are, Eddie. You were bitter the whole time. This is exactly who you are.
Yeah, even, what is it, like 40 years after the fact, you're still a bitter asshole.
Right.
And while talking to Billy's daughter, too? Like, you can't, like, you're still,
Well, and it's like,
yikes.
And Pete wasn't in it the whole time until that last bit where we actually hear from, like, Pete himself, right? So, like, you wanted to kind of look at Eddie and be like, if you don't want to be that person, you could just not be a part of this, and then you wouldn't be that person. Like, done.
Right. And I thought it was so funny that Pete was the first one to actually voice that he wanted to be out, because we didn't hear anything from him. Like, what do you have to be unhappy about, Pete? You barely go here.
No, I think so much about this book was, now that I'm thinking about it, was about finding your happy and was about finding what greatness in your life means. And it showed this massive swath of characters to say, you know, there is greatness in all of these people. There is happiness in all of these people, but it's entirely different from one person to the next. And that's a really, I think, amazing thing for Taylor Jenkins Reid to take on.
The last little thing that I wanted to just mention and share my excitement is that this has already been optioned for an adaptation. Amazon ordered it, I think, like right after it came out. I think Reese Witherspoon is involved, so it's going to be a miniseries, I believe, on Amazon, and I am hyped for that. I think this is going to be excellent on the screen in way, and I think they're going to have to probably, kind of open up the story a little bit more and give us more, which is all I ever wanted. So I'm really, really excited about this.
Agreed.
Dear Amazon, let me in. I'm available. I have nothing better to do. I don't care who I am. Let me be in this, please.
I think it's really interesting too that it's Reese Witherspoon's production company too. Like I'm like, okay, that's right. That makes perfect sense. I'm excited to see what you do with it.
I'm very excited to see if they maintain the interview structure, because I think that would be really cool, like kind of spread out if they use it correctly, spread out through the thing, just so we can maintain some of that voice of the original. So in general, just really looking forward to this. Even with all the ups and downs of the book itself, I think on screen it's going to be really great.
Yeah. So we'll see you all again in a year and a half, 2 years, whatever, when it's done. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, thank you to Devin and Kat for joining us this week, and thank you all for listening. We'd love to hear all of your thoughts on Daisy Jones and the Six. As I mentioned, this was our book club book for April. So if you would like to join in on that conversation or keep informed on our future book club books, you can make sure to join our Discord community. You can also sign up for our community on patreon.com/snark squad, and there you can find polls, including polls on future book club books, live hangouts, and other bonus content. You can also find us on Twitter at snark_squad. You can find me at My Name is Marines.
I am at Sweeney Says.
I am cat_tastic.
And I am at Devin Hinchy, DEVYNHINCHEE.
Thank you as always to Stefan Chin for the theme music that is playing us out right now, and we will be back in your feed next week. Bye.
Bye.